Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and hello everyone, and welcome directly from the 2022 World Games in Birmingham, Alabama, where I am today. Apologies in advance for any background noise, and hopefully there will be no distractions or interruptions during this session. As always, please allow me first and foremost to introduce the simultaneous translation option. We already know that on the Zoom menu, you can see the function called interpretation. The slides in our original audio today are in English, but you can also listen to simultaneous translation in Arabic, French, Mandarin Chinese, Russian, and Spanish. And while everyone is settling into the right language channels, you can of course use the chat function to tell us hello. And I can see it exploding with messages. So thank you to everyone writing in. I noted a few countries in the very beginning to say hi, but I'm missing many more as I speak. But just wanted to say hello to New Zealand, Russia, Austria, Argentina, Azerbaijan, Italy, Mexico, Morocco, Spain, and Lesotho, and to everyone else writing in as I speak. So for the introductions, my name is Olia Abasolo, and I'm a member of the education team at the International Testing Agency. This is our third webinar in a series of 5 that we bring to you every Thursday in conjunction with your international federation. For those of you that have been tuning in for the last 2 weeks, welcome back. For our new guests today, thank you for joining. Writing Azerbaijan really excitedly, but if you can leave us space for other guests to write in the chat, that would be greatly appreciated. So I will be delivering the content of today's webinar. I will also play a few expert videos throughout the session. These have been recorded by my ITA colleague and sports pharmacist, Mark Stewart, and by former athlete and a sports medicine physician, Margot Mountjoy. Mark will then join me for the live Q&A session at the end of the webinar. As always, a quick reminder before we begin, this presentation is being recorded. Great, so on your screen, you can see the logos of the 7 international federations represented today. And the sports are luge, gymnastics, judo, roller sports and skateboarding, golf, boxing, baseball, and softball. Thanks to all the federations for joining together to give you, our audience, access to these series. Again, I can see a lot of messages, so hello to everyone from Latvia. Again, a big representation of Azerbaijan, so thank you for that, but let's leave some space in the chat for everyone else. Czech Republic, India, Tahiti, Ghana, Panama. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who is joining. So a few quick reminders for anyone joining us for the first time. On your screen is the agenda for the full 5-week course. We'll cover all key anti-doping topics as outlined in the World Anti-Doping Code and the International Standard for Education. Each week, we'll start with an outline of the objectives of the session in order to help put your learning into context. And importantly, again, after the webinar, we will send you the materials and we'll send you a form stack, a survey to help you evaluate your learning. Okay, so of course, we do offer a course completion certificate as well. We know that this is very popular. So just a reminder, please register with the same email address every week so that we can get you your certificate on time. Let's now move on to the agenda of the day. If you chose to only attend one session, this is certainly the right one. Today's topic is one of the most important for athletes, their support personnel, and all those working with athletes. We'll start with the medications and the prohibited list. We'll talk about how medications are added to the list, how to navigate it, and finish with some practical tips. We'll then discuss supplements and the food first approach, and how these two go together. As always, our webinars are quite interactive. After we cover the first 2-3 topics, we will run an activity with the audience to test your knowledge. This activity will be done with a poll function on Zoom, and a reminder that all answers are anonymous, so please do participate with us. The final agenda item for today is Therapeutic Use Exemptions, or TUE for short. We will explain what a TUE is, and once again, leave you with some practical tips. We'll also have a few minutes for questions and answers, so please don't hesitate to send them to us through the Q&A. Just a reminder here, if you send us your questions in the chat, they will get lost. You can see how many messages are coming in. So please do use the Q&A function to send us your questions. If you have any administrative questions in terms of missed sessions, materials, or any other questions, we can answer those by email. And if your question is not related to today's topic, you can also email us. We will put our address on the screen so that you can reach us. Excellent. So let's look at the learning objectives, which I will repeat for the sake of simultaneous translation, but here they are on your screen in English. By the end of today's webinar, you should understand the purpose and the structure of the prohibited list, understand the food first approach and the risks associated with supplements, understand how to make an informed decision about the use of supplements, of course, be able to check your medications, know what a therapeutic use exemption is, and how to apply for one if needed. Of course, I should mention that supplement contamination, failure to file a therapeutic use exemption when one is needed, and general lack of knowledge of the prohibited substances are all major causes of inadvertent doping. Therefore, our overall objective for these webinars and for today is to protect you and your athletes from inadvertent doping. So hopefully this session equips you with all the right tools and resources to do this. So let's dive right in and start with the prohibited list. Over the next 15 minutes, we'll cover all the key aspects of it. We'll kick off with a brief introduction of the prohibited list and a very quick refresher of session 1 that many of you attended 2 weeks ago. In this video, you will also see how or why substances and methods are actually added to the list. So let's take a look.
Hello, I'm Mark Stewart. I'm a sports pharmacist here at the International Testing Agency. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about medications and supplements and some of the things that are important for athletes, their support personnel, and healthcare professionals to know when considering whether to take medications or supplements. First of all, I want to cover just a brief overview of the anti-doping landscape. Now, the World Anti-Doping Agency is the independent international body responsible for harmonizing anti-doping policies in sports in all countries around the world. They produce the World Anti-Doping Code, which is the core document that harmonizes these anti-doping policies and procedures and regulations in every country in the world. The other documents that WADA produces are international standards, and one of those that is very important for athletes and their support personnel to understand is the prohibited list. A substance or method can be added to the prohibited list if it is deemed to meet 2 of the following 3 criteria. So firstly, that it has the potential to enhance or enhances sport performance, that the use of the substance or method represents an actual or potential health risk to the athlete, and lastly, that the use of the substance or the method violates the spirit of sport.
We hope you enjoyed that first video. Let's now take a look at the structure of the prohibited list. And it's divided into 3 main categories. First, as you can see, is prohibited at all times. Second is prohibited during only the in-competition period. I will define this in just a few seconds. And third, substances and methods prohibited only in particular sports. Now, this category is not applicable to the sports of luge, gymnastics, judo, boxing, skateboarding, roller sports, baseball, and softball. There are no additional substances or methods prohibited in your sports. So of course, it's good to know that this section and this category exists, but it does not impact you. However, this category does apply to athletes from golf. It is very important to note that beta blockers are prohibited in your sport during the in-competition period. And again, we'll come back to this term, in-competition period, very soon. But before we do that, let's now go back to Mark to hear more about substances and methods prohibited at all times and during the in-competition period.
So these are the substances that are prohibited at all times. And they include the following categories. So first of all, anabolic agents. And these include things like testosterone or clenbuterol. These drugs are used to increase muscle mass and to improve strength, and they exert their benefit in those ways. The next category is peptide hormones and growth factors. Now these include things like erythropoietin or EPO and growth hormone. Now these substances are sometimes used therapeutically for certain medical conditions. Beta-2 agonists is another category, also commonly seen in many medications, particularly asthma medications. And some athletes who suffer from asthma may need to take these on a regular basis for the treatment of their condition. There's hormone and metabolic modulators. And again, this is another common group of medications that athletes sometimes need to take. For example, insulin for diabetes. Meldonium is another example of a metabolic modulator, and meldonium is sometimes bought over the counter in some countries. Diuretics and masking agents is another category. An example of that is the drug furosemide. These drugs are used to eliminate fluid from the body, and in doing so can reduce the weight of the athlete to enable them to qualify for lower weight categories. And then the prohibited list also identifies a number of methods that are prohibited, including blood transfusions and intravenous infusions in certain situations. The next group of substances are those that are prohibited only during the in-competition period. And examples of those classes of drugs are as follows. So we've got the stimulant category, and this includes things like ephedrine or pseudoephedrine. Stimulants are found in a lot of over-the-counter preparations that are commonly used for cough and cold remedies. And athletes need to pay particular attention when they're purchasing things from a pharmacy to make sure that some of these stimulant drugs are not contained within those products. Narcotics is the next category, and this includes things such as morphine or drugs for strong analgesia or strong pain relief. And athletes may be prescribed these in the course of their treatment for some sports injuries, particularly severe injuries with strong pain associated with them. Cannabinoids include cannabis and hashish, and again, these are only prohibited in competition. Glucocorticoids is another class of drugs commonly prescribed to athletes for the treatment of inflammatory conditions of the joints. And these are prohibited by certain routes of administration, for example, intramuscular routes or intravenous routes of administration.
All right, let's come back now to this in competition versus out of competition period definition. And on your screen, you can see the definition of the in competition period. However, it's very, very important to understand that it does not mean that the athlete should stop taking a prohibited substance at 11:59 p.m. the day before their competition. Rather, this means that the substance must leave the athlete's body by the time they enter this in-competition period. And different substances take different amounts of time to leave the system. So please be extra careful. And if you're in doubt, speak to your medical professional. And the definition, as you see on the screen, applies to all the federations and all the athletes that are present today from the 7 international federations. And this definition can also be found in the anti-doping rules of each federation. So, regardless of whether you are a gymnast, a luger, judoka, boxer, skateboarder, roller sports, baseball, or softball athlete, you all have the same in-competition period. Okay, as you saw, the prohibited list can be difficult to navigate. I'm sure there were some new words that you saw in the video from Mark, but here are a few tips and tricks to help you navigate. So let's take a look at these now. First and foremost, both medications that are prescription and over-the-counter can be on the prohibited list. So check anything that you purchase and plan to take. Next, athletes should remind their doctors that they're an athlete and subject to anti-doping regulations. Even if you go to a dentist or a gynecologist or for any other treatment or consultation, especially if it's not related to sport, please inform your medical professional. I should also note here that not all medical professionals are familiar with the prohibited list, so you'll have to show it to them on your phone or maybe in print version so they can help you navigate it. And of course, a reminder again from the previous slide that different substances take different amounts of time to leave the system. So be extra careful with any substances prohibited during the in-competition period. Let's move on to a few more tips. Some medications are prohibited in large doses. If the medication you are taking is subject to this limitation, please do carefully monitor your intake. Take exactly what was recommended. Some brand names offer multiple variations of the same product, and there is a real risk that one may contain a prohibited substance while another does not. And finally, what is allowed in one country may be prohibited in another. Even medications of the same brand may have a different ingredient in another country. And this is especially important as we are here at the World Games today with athletes traveling from all over the world, and this question comes up very often. So there's a lot to think about when you try to determine the status of a medication and whether or not you can take it or your athlete can take it. But there are some good resources out there to help you do this. First and foremost, we always recommend speaking to your sports doctor or pharmacist first. Or you can contact your national anti-doping organization, or NADO for short. And note here, again, a general pharmacist and a general doctor may not have all the knowledge of anti-doping. So if you have access to a sports pharmacist or a sports doctor of your team, that is preferred. Make sure, if you are talking to a general pharmacist, that you ask them to point out the medical ingredients on your product and ask them to help you check it against the prohibited list. Now, if you are checking medications yourself, of course, that's also possible. And for that, we recommend using Global Draw. You can see the website address on your screen, globaldraw.com. This is an online database, and it's always based on the most current version of the prohibited list. And we'll see how this works in just a second. What's also important to remember is that the prohibited list is updated at least annually and goes into effect always at the beginning of each year. So every year, the list is published in October. Then it will go into effect on January 1st, the following year. So for example, for 2022, you can use the 2022 prohibited list, but just in a few months, a new list will be published. So you can review it already for 2023 to give you plenty of time to prepare for the next year and to make any adjustments in your medications if you need to. Also note that there were some important changes to the prohibited list in 2022. If you want to know more about these changes, you can scan the QR code on your screen to see a webinar that specifically covered this topic. All right, let's spend a few minutes on supplements now that we've covered medications. But before we talk about supplements specifically, we do want to start with a food-first approach. Now, this comes from a document called the IOC Consensus on Dietary Supplements and the High Performance Athlete. But the title is not as important as the content. This statement was elaborated by a number of experts in sport and nutrition. It represents many different geographical regions and sporting bodies. So as I mentioned, it's the outcomes of this statement that are important for the context of today's session. And the outcomes are as follows. First, the use of supplements is widespread at all levels of sport. And second, nutrition makes a small but potentially valuable contribution to performance. And dietary supplements make an even smaller contribution. But again, this can be potentially very valuable when it comes to athletes and performance. So what does that mean exactly? Let's take a look at this. When compared to other factors like training, motivation, access to facilities and equipment, maybe even talent, nutrition plays a small, but again, potentially valuable role in performance. But this becomes very important when you're standing on the start line and all of your competitors are just as strong, healthy, mentally fit as you are. So indeed, nutrition can be one of those factors that makes a difference between winning and losing. And the same way as nutrition plays a part in an athlete's performance, the use of supplements plays an even smaller part in the overall athlete's nutrition strategy. So with this in mind, let's speak about nutrition very quickly for one more slide before we move on to supplements. So what is a food-first approach? It simply means that you need to think about your diet before you think about dietary supplements. So if you as an athlete make good choices and incorporate all the food groups in your diet, it will give you all the nutrients necessary and in the right amounts. So in that way, nutrition is quite simple. You can get all the things like carbohydrates, proteins, fats, vitamins from food and from water. Where it gets a little more complicated is the effect of heavy training or competition on athletes. Now that can call for some additional nutrients to be required by your body as a result of heavy training or competition. While this can still be achieved with good nutrition, it can get a little more complicated and a little bit more difficult for the athlete to understand exactly what more of they need to eat in order to compensate for this heavier load. So again, this is where we emphasize the need to work with a qualified nutritionist or pharmacist who can help you with your personal needs as an individual and as an athlete. Okay, so back to supplements now. We talked about the food-first approach to put all of this into context, but it's an anti-doping webinar, so let's switch right over. But we need to define what a supplement is first. And while there's no one definition that exists, what we can talk about is how different products are described and how they target different issues. So here, let's take a look at a few examples. First, there are supplements that address micronutrient deficiencies. What that means is it compensates for something that your body is missing. Most common here are tablets, so for example, iron or vitamin D. The second type of need is for supply of convenient forms of energy and macronutrients. So something that is easy to consume, like a power bar or gel, and these are often used during competition for long days that athletes may have. Third, there are supplements that provide a direct benefit to performance, and a protein powder is a common example of this. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. And finally, a supplement can also provide indirect benefits, such as being a sleep aid if you're entering a different time zone, or helping with inflammation or recovery. Now that we've presented different types of supplements, there are many types of supplements out there. We have our first poll question for the audience, so thank you for your patience so far. And this should appear on your screen now. You can use the poll function to submit the response, and a reminder that all answers are completely anonymous. So the question is, do you or the athletes that you work with use supplements? The answers are easy: yes, no, or I don't know. Let's give you a few seconds to answer. In the meantime, I'll say hello to a few more of our listeners. So hi to Angola, Colombia, Lesotho, Serbia, Pakistan, France, and Iraq. Thank you to everyone else that I haven't given a shout out to. It's great to have such a big audience with us today. Buenos dias, I can see in the chat. Bonjour tout le monde. Hello. So very quick responses coming in. Thank you very much for your participation. Let's give it one more second and share the results with everybody. Okay, so here we can see a large percentage of people saying yes to this question, that yes, you or the athletes that you work with use supplements. We have 33% that said no, and actually 16 that said I don't know, which is an important number to keep in mind as we move forward, because there are some risks associated with supplements. So let's close this poll and we can move on to our next slide. Excellent. Now again, the appropriate use of some supplements can benefit some athletes. This means that supplements are most likely to be beneficial when, one, an athlete receives an expert advice based on their needs as a person and as an athlete. Two, when the supplement is taken in the right dosage. Three, when supplements that have a good evidence of have good health evidence are being taken. And four, when the athlete takes a supplement that has been batch tested. So if you don't know what that means, we'll talk about it in just a few seconds. So all of this is important for everyone who has answered yes or I don't know, and generally very good information for any high performance athlete. And this is important because there are a number of risks. First and foremost, because the supplement industry is not well regulated, there are many supplement products available on the market that are mislabeled, ingredients are not properly listed, and the supplement may contain a prohibited substance that is not on the label. Contamination is another real risk of using supplements. Remember, these are designed not just for athletes, but for regular people who are not subject to the anti-doping rules and the code. So the company that you may have selected can also produce other types of products containing prohibited substances in the same facility. So there's a real risk of cross-contamination. And finally, supplements can pose health risks. First, simply to the reasons that I described, you may be inadvertently ingesting a prohibited substance without knowing it. And the second issue is always the dosage. Just like medications, it's important that you take supplements in the right dose. So if you don't have expert advice on how to do this, you may be doing yourself more harm than good. Ultimately, it's important to remember that no supplement is 100% risk-free. and we'll speak to you about what you can do to manage these risks next. So when it comes to deciding whether or not to take supplements, we suggest to do a risk-benefit analysis. The first thing you should do is determine whether benefit to you as an athlete is likely. Are you taking a supplement just because a teammate is doing the same or because your coach may think that it's a good idea? Make sure that the reason for taking a supplement is justified, that the need a particular supplement is fulfilling is coming with advice from a medical professional or a nutritionist. So this is our first step in the decision-making process. The next step is then to seek out supplements that are safer and know what dosage you need to take. Use products that come from reputable companies and those that have been tested by independent companies not related to the supplement producer. On that note, there are many independent companies that test supplements around the world. On your screen, you can see a few of our suggestions. There may be a country and a language-specific tool as well. And for those of you that are here at the World Games, for example, we do recommend NSF certified for sport, that is in the middle. And we'll use Informed Sport in our interactive activity later on. So let's wrap up with some practical advice. First, get informed, use reliable information resources. Speak to a nutritionist or consider consulting one if you don't have one yet. If you do not have access to a certified nutritionist, conduct a self-assessment with the help of your doctor, coach, your national anti-doping organization, or the resources that are available online. For example, both USADA, the US Anti-Doping Agency, and the Australian Sport Institute have free resources that you can use for this purpose, and we've included them in this deck. So when you receive the slides, you'll have the links. Most importantly, if you decide that the benefits of supplements outweigh the risks, choose the products that have been tested. Our final point is on due diligence. We strongly recommend that you keep the original packaging of the product, or at least take a photo of it. Make sure that you capture the name of the supplement, the brand, and the batch number. If you received medical advice from a doctor, such as a prescription, keep that as well. Unlikely situation that you test positive, all this information is very important to prove the source of contamination during the legal process. We even recommend keeping a bit of the product in case it needs to be tested for prohibited substances in a lab. Okay, a lot of information coming your way, but that brings us to the end of the presentation on supplements and medications. Again, thank you for your patience as we gave you all this important information. But now we would like to interact with you for a game called Do You Know Your Drugs? It's a very simple game. I will show you a few medications or supplements on the screen and provide a brief description. Based on that, you can check whether a medication or supplement is safe to take, or you can just take a guess. The game requires all of you to participate, and all the answers are anonymous, so please don't hesitate, even if you're not sure of the right answer. So let's give it a try. We can start with a relatively easy one. And this one is branded Tylenol, a common painkiller brand in North America. But it may be new to members of our audience from other parts of the world, like Europe, Africa, Asia, or Oceania. So the medical ingredient name is right below the brand name. And this is a good example for athletes who travel and may need to purchase an over-the-counter medication abroad. So for the purposes of simultaneous translation, the options are prohibited at all times, prohibited in competition only, prohibited in certain dosage, or not prohibited in sport. These are the four options that you have available as the choices for Tylenol. So let's give you a few more seconds. Good, so the answers are coming in. Let's see if we can reach 60% of you responding. And again, thank you to everyone writing in. Hello to everyone writing in the chat and listening in, and to those participating. I can see questions coming in as well in the Q&A, so thank you for those. We'll get to them at the end of the session. Just a reminder, please don't wait until the last minute to send us your questions. If we have more questions, we'll try to address as many as we can during the Q&A. Okay, great. So let's close this poll and share the results with the audience. The most popular answer is prohibited in competition only with 35%. But the correct answer here is that it's actually not prohibited in sport. Maybe I scared you with all this information earlier on. This one is safe to take. If we go to the next slide, we can see the screenshot from Global Draw. And you can see if you're using globaldraw.com, it gives you 2 green check marks. It's not prohibited in the in competition period, and it's not prohibited out of competition. Okay, let's go to the next one. Here we have a medication that can be bought over the counter, so no prescription required. You can see on the label that it states that medication provides relief from cold symptoms, a runny nose, congestion, etc. The options are, is it prohibited at all times, prohibited in competition only, prohibited in certain dosage, or not prohibited in sport? Answers coming in much quicker for this one. I will tell you right away, as you can't see the back end, but the correct answer is now dominating the polls. So great job to everyone. We'll share the results in just a second. Let's reach 60% of you responding and we can close the poll. Great. So indeed, this particular medication is prohibited in competition only. And you can see on Global Draw that it gives you a clear indication of this, that this is a substance prohibited in competition only, which is ephedrine, very common substance found in over-the-counter medications for cold and congestion. So be extra careful. Sometimes the branding may look very harmless, like the one that we saw with some lemons and tea. Always check every product. Okay, we have our third one coming up. This one is an asthma pump. Asthma is quite a common condition in athletes, particularly in endurance sports, but many others. This particular medication is labeled as an inhalation powder. It's used to manage asthma symptoms and is available with a prescription from a doctor. And I believe we already have a question related to this in the Q&A, which we'll come back to. So thank you for this question, Erica. The options I'll read out again because there's a new option. So for simultaneous translation, prohibited at all times, prohibited in certain dosage, prohibited in certain routes of administration, not prohibited in sport. And there's more than one correct answer. So we added a new option, which may give you an indication that it may be the correct one or one of the correct options. So again, thank you for all the quick responses. Let's get to 60%. And again, great job. Many of you are giving us the correct answer here. Okay, so let's share the results. So indeed, 2 correct answers here, and you have selected those. 46% say prohibited in certain dosage, and 38% said prohibited in certain routes of administration. both of these are correct. And let's see what that means on the screen. So here you can see, I'm just going to close the poll for myself to make sure that I can see the screen. Excellent. So here you can see the conditional use of the substance is permitted if the medication is administered through inhalation, which is of course the case for an asthma pump. Other routes of administration are prohibited, which means if you wanted to take a pill containing the same medication as the pump, you would not be able to do so within the context of sport. In addition, this medication is what is known as a threshold substance, something you can take in limited dosage. The additional information in Global DRO will give you information, as you can see here. It's a little small, but on the website, you can see exactly how much you're allowed to take. Now, important for athletes, this is written in micrograms, which may not mean anything to you. So when you are with your doctor, ask them what that means in terms of dosage, how many pumps you can take for asthma medication, for example. If the dosage you require is higher than the limit, you will need to apply for a therapeutic use exemption, and we'll talk about that in just a second. Okay, we've got two more. Let's move on to the next one. We've got Vicks inhaler nasal sticks, and I'll go a little quicker to make sure that we finish on time. Like the first medications, this one does not require a prescription, used to treat a stuffy nose, sinus congestion. You can see here that the packaging is different. One is sold in the US and the other in the UK. New options on your poll. Option 1, both are prohibited at all times. Option 2, product on the left is prohibited in competition only. Option 3, product on the right is prohibited in competition only. And our final choice is both are not prohibited in sport. Apologies for anyone in advance listening on their phones. We recognize that these may be a little bit too small to read the text on the labels, but you will get the slides by email at the end, so you can always go back and review. Okay, let's give you a couple of more seconds and we'll wrap up soon just to keep this webinar on time. Okay, let's close the poll and share the results. So the most common answer here is that both are not prohibited in sports. And indeed, that is not the correct answer. So if we look at the next slide, product on the left contains a substance prohibited in competition, but permitted out of competition. So this is very important here. As you compare it to the next slide and the next product, you can see here that the other product that was on the right contains menthol only and is not prohibited in sport. So a reminder to always check the labels, as these products are the same brand, but one can be bought in the UK and the other one in the US. And this is a real story that we often use. An athlete lost their Olympic medal as a result of this small mistake, or a big mistake, I should say. Okay, last one for today. Here are some caplets that support muscle strength. So what do you think about this one? Is it prohibited at all times? Prohibited in competition only? Is this considered a supplement? Or is it not prohibited in sport? So give it a try. This is our last poll of the day before we move on to therapeutic use exemptions. Great, many answers coming in. We'll give it 2 or 3 more seconds. Okay, let's close down the poll, and maybe the fact that we had a new option give you an indication. Indeed, this is considered a supplement. So we don't necessarily say whether or not it's prohibited in sport, but it's important that you understand that this is a supplement and not a medication. So here we are using Informed Sport, an independent organization that batch tests supplements to check the product. So when you check a product like this, make sure that it matches the brand name, the image, and the batch number. So again, we hope that you found this activity helpful and useful, and thank you very much for participating. Overall, our advice is to always check everything before you take it, and we hope that this was helpful for you. Now that we've covered medications and supplements, let's discuss therapeutic use exemptions. And to kick off this last section of today's course, we will play a clip from Dr. Margot Mountjoy, who will explain what a TUE is and go over who requires one.
Hello, my name is Dr. Margot Mountjoy, and I'm a sport medicine physician from Canada. Today, I'll be speaking to you about therapeutic use exemptions, or TUEs. So what is a TUE? Athletes, like all people, may have illnesses or conditions that require them to take particular medications or undergo procedures. If the medication required to treat an illness is on the WADA prohibited list, then a therapeutic use exemption, or a TUE, may give that athlete permission to use it within the context of the sport regulations. Who requires a TUE? Any athlete who may be subject to doping control must request a TUE before taking a prohibited medication. Of course, all information that was requested would remain strictly confidential.
Now, the World Anti-Doping Agency provides specific guidance as to what is required for a TUE to be granted in an official document called the International Standard for Therapeutic Use Exemptions. A summary of these requirements can be seen on the screen, but we'll go back to Margot, who will explain these in detail.
For a TUE to be granted, all 4 criteria must be met. The first criteria is that your health would be jeopardized or negatively affected if you don't take the prohibited drug. In other words, the prohibited drug is needed for your health and well-being. The second criteria is that the therapeutic use of the prohibited drug would not produce a significant enhancement or improvement in your sport performance beyond what would be expected if you were to improve to normal health. The third criteria is that there isn't another non-prohibited medical drug that could be used to treat your health condition instead. The fourth criteria is that the medical condition that requires the use of the prohibited substance or method is not the result of a previous use of a prohibited substance or method. For the TUE to be granted, all 4 of these criteria must be met.
So let's talk about when an athlete should apply for a TUE. For those substances prohibited in competition only, athletes should file for a TUE at least 30 days before taking part in a competition, or generally as soon as they know that they require a prohibited substance. Athletes can, of course, obtain a retroactive therapeutic use exemption in certain situations. For example, if you require an emergency treatment, such as surgery after getting injured on or off the field of play. It goes without saying that this applies to both emergencies related to sport and not related to sport, so something that can happen in your personal life. Once you're ready to apply for a TUE, here are the next steps. All international level in today's session can use the most up-to-date application form that is on the International Testing Agency website. So you can see it here, ita.sport/TUE. If you're a national level athlete, make sure you submit your application to your national anti-doping agency. Once the right form has been downloaded, athlete and their physician complete it together and submit through Adams. And in this form, make sure you include all the medical details and documentation. Next, a panel of experts will then review the file and grant the TUE for a specific substance, dose, and duration. Here you can see a complete life cycle of a TUE. As you can see, it's a bit of a process, but it should go smoothly for the athlete if they file for a TUE on time and if their application is complete. We will now conclude this presentation with some useful therapeutic use exemption tips from Margot. So let's take a look at our final video of the day.
So please follow these important tips. Number 1, check all your medications against the WADA prohibited list when you get a prescription from your physician. Number 2, please make sure that the therapeutic use exemption application form is completely and accurately filled out. Number 3, importantly, if you have a change in your dose or the type of medication, you must reapply for a new therapeutic use exemption. And number 4, keep track of your TUE expiry date, because when the TUE runs out, you're no longer granted permission for the use of that substance, and you must reapply for a new TUE. I will now provide you with some TUE tips for athletes during doping control. It's important that you declare all of your medications and supplements that you've used in the past 7 days on the doping control form, even if those substances are not prohibited. This includes all the medications for which you have a TUE granted, and simply specify on the doping control form that you have a TUE for this substance. It's not necessary that you have the actual TUE form with you, but it is important, please, to add your dosage and the dates that you last took the medication.
And this brings us to the end of today's course. On your screen, you can see a list of useful resources, many of which we have already mentioned. And these are clickable links, so you can take a look at these pages when you receive the slides by email. Okay, we've got a few minutes for questions, and there are many. So for this, I will welcome back Mark Stewart, whom you already saw in the videos, for a live Q&A. Welcome, Mark.
Hi, Ali. Hi, everyone. Looking forward to the questions. There's some really interesting questions there in the chat.
Indeed. So I'm opening up the question and answer. I will read out the questions in the order that they came in, and we'll try to address as many as we can in the next 5 minutes or so. And apologies in advance. If we don't get to your question, please email us. We will respond in writing. Okay, so let's go to Erica. Some medicine is only banned above a certain dose. If an athlete has been prescribed a lower dose, do they need a TUE? For example, inhaled salbutamol is not banned when the following is true: maximum 1600 micrograms over 24 hours in divided doses, not to exceed 600 micrograms over 8 hours, starting from any dose. Is a TUE still required for a lower dose?
Hi, Erica. So you don't need a TUE if your dose is actually below those dosing limits that are on the prohibited list. So the salbutamol example that you give there, if it's above 1600 micrograms a day, now that's for most of the salbutamol puffers, that is about 16 puffs. There's 100 micrograms in each puff. So any more than 16 puffs a day would be over the threshold, and you would have to have a TUE for that. There's some other restrictions for salbutamol in that you can't use more than 600 micrograms. That's usually 6 puffs over 8 hours from any last dose. So there's some limits also for some other asthma drugs, formoterol, salmeterol, and vilanterol, where these limits apply. But basically, if you're below those limits, you don't need a TUE.
Thank you, Mark. Excellent. Let's move on straight to the next question from Lewis. My question is regarding TUEs and the use of hydrocortisone and or PRP injections for osteoarthritis.
Sure. Great question. I'll start with the PRP. That's a platelet-derived preparation, and this is not prohibited. You don't need a TUE for PRP. There's some really good information on the WADA website under the Q&A section on the WADA website specifically about PRP, which is worth reading. For hydrocortisone, where there's an injection, which is usually into the joint, possibly for the condition that you're talking about there, it's only prohibited in competition. Now, one thing to remember with injections of glucocorticoids, hydrocortisone is an example of a glucocorticoid, there are washout periods that WADA has published to guide your prescriber and you in terms of how long it takes to actually leave your system. So for hydrocortisone, if it's injected, the washout period is 3 days before it actually leaves your body. If you are competing within that 3-day window, even if that 3 days is outside of the competition period, you should prepare a therapeutic use exemption in the event that you do test positive for that drug. So please do look at the WADA regulations for glucocorticoids. They have changed as of the 1st of January this year, and there's some very specific information around that. If it's in the in-competition period, you will certainly need a TUE.
Thank you, Mark. And again, the QR code that you saw earlier in the presentation leads to the webinar on the changes to the prohibited list webinar that we delivered last year. So please take a look. And WADA website also provides a wealth of resources on these changes. I will move on to Nupav's question. Is there a set of different prohibited substances for the sports you said that are not covered in today's PowerPoint? Of course, we are working with 7 federations today, but if you happen to work with other sports, there are a few additional sports that fall into this category of sports where beta blockers are prohibited. And this can be easily found on the WADA page for the prohibited list. It's quite well done and easy to navigate. I don't know if you have anything to add for this, Mark.
No, I think that the point is all the lists on the WADA prohibited list are applicable to all sports around the world, except for that one little category of the beta blockers, Olya, that you mentioned there. Occasionally, there are some sports that have some drugs within the rules of their sport. Now, some examples of that are cycling. Tramadol is prohibited in cycling, and alcohol is prohibited in motorsports. But I think for most, they're the only 2 that I can think of at the moment. I think the sports of the federations that are on the call today, I don't believe there's any additional drugs that are in the rules of your sport. But certainly worth checking with your federation if there are any specific rules that your federation implies. But other than that, the prohibited list applies to all athletes, all sports in every country around the world.
Thank you, Mark. Let's go very quickly now. I can see a general comment from Jesus. Indeed, very important for coaches to know whether their athletes take supplements or not as part of their training regime. So thank you for that comment. Completely agree with this, of course. And we'll try to squeeze in one last question. So maybe a 30-second answer for Christiana. How long should an athlete keep prescription form or medication pack? Mark.
So it's always good to have that reference of what you've taken. Some drugs can stay in your body for quite a few months, depending on the drug. So my recommendation was keep the packet for, I'd say, sort of 3 or 4 months after you stop taking them. But just to also add, your doctor must also keep medical records. If they prescribe anything to you, they will always have a note of what they've given you. And your pharmacist will always keep records of the drugs that they've dispensed to you. So if you need to find out what was given to you by either your doctor or your pharmacist, they should be keeping medical records that you could also refer to.
Okay, thank you, Mark. That does not leave us any more time to answer other questions. Our apologies again. Please email us. We'll get back to you. We will respond. So we will put the email address on the screen. But a reminder that our next webinar is at 2 p.m. on Thursday, July 21st. Check the time zone in your location. As always, this is Central European time. The topic is principles and values of clean sport. We'll also discuss sanctions and other consequences of doping, as well as speaking up. And here's the QR code to register. So after the webinar ends, you will automatically be redirected to a survey. It should take no more than 3 minutes to complete. Please take the time to fill it out. And once again, a reminder that you will receive slides by email. And if you wish to receive your course completion certificate, please always register for every session with the same email. So that is a wrap for today. Here's our email address, education@ita.sport. Mark, thank you very much. I know we went fast through these questions. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Olga.
And thank you to our audience for your participation in the polls, in the chat, and in the Q&A. We hope that you found this session valuable, and we're here to support you with any further questions. So thank you all once again, and I wish you a great rest of your day or a good evening. Bye for now.